So as promised, Raven Ridge knives, I'm going to show you how to do the elk antler with the brass bolster on. Again, how I do it. There may be other methods of doing it, but this is the way that I do it, and it seems to work and they seem to last. So again, if it's not broke, I don't fix it. So the difference between what I call a full tang and a hidden tang is that you use a piece of antler as it is. This one here you have to shape down and fit onto a tang. So instead of having a nice round piece or something to the effect that you can handle on and then just drilling a small hole in there, putting a tang in there, and then pinning that up, this will be putting like slabs on, or scales, whatever you would want to call them, onto the side, which is a little bit more trickier, a lot more attention to the process of when you do this and when you do that, before you do that and after you do this type thing. So we'll go through that there. I'll show you some of the stuff. This is the one I did the other day. I'll be doing this one here today. So first off, I'm finding a piece of antler. With doing this, the curvatures, it's so hard to find a piece that would fit in there until you actually got the piece in there. You know, so you need a relatively flat piece, because scale material is flat, and then you make it the shape that you want it to. This is already the shape it is, and you have to work that shape into the knife handle. So finding that piece on there is sometimes the hardest part. We do smelt our own brass. I mean, you don't have to do that. You can go out and buy brass bars and brass stuff that you do. But we smelt our pieces out. You know, they kind of start out looking like that there, and then, you know, if you had a mill, it would be great to clean them off and stuff like that there. But I just run them on my belt sanders, get them cleaned up so that you have a level spot to start working from your cuts and stuff like that there. And then I'll cut my pieces out, split that in half, and that'll be my two sides of my bolster. So what I'll do now is I'll start figuring out where I want to find the pieces on this antler. This in here would really be nice. So maybe I'll just cut this section off and I'll use some of this piece down here, because here's two sides. There's a side I could use and there's a side I could use that are relatively flat and I think would fit in there. So I'm going to mark those where I want to start the cuts out, and always go over a little bit. I realize antler material does cost a lot, but it's better to have a little extra to work with in case you need to work on your angles. And I'll show you those angles and stuff of what I'm talking about a little bit later on lining up to make sure that you have your piece properly oriented in there so that you get the most out of it. Okay, so we got that piece cut out. From here, what you're going to want to try to do is find your spots. You can start to see a little bit more of the flatness and stuff like that there. This is a nice piece because it has a rather thick hard spot. The pith is not as wide as some of them I've seen. You know, you get less workable stuff because that's just flaky, bubbly, whatever you want to call it. It's loose. It's not good material. You can stabilize it by putting some epoxy into it, but it just has a different look than the bone does when it's done. But here so it's almost 4/10 of an inch, which is almost ½ inch. Over here, you know, we probably got, yeah. So this is a nice piece to work with, but we want a flat piece that's that wide. So we'll start looking into those areas. This one is obviously going to be one. So this section here, we'll make a cut and get this piece out. So we'll kind of cut it on that angle. We'll get that piece out, and then this side over here also looks as good as well. So we'll make another cut there and get probably that piece out. We'll cut down through there, cutting it this direction, slab that piece off, and then we'll slab this piece off here, and both of them should give us the width that we need and the curvature that we need to create the handle, because we're going to come to back about here with our brass. So we'll go make them cuts, and then also I'm going to cut my brass up and start that there, because to truly finalize it, I'll be putting it up against the brass piece that's already on there. So now that we have two pieces that we can use and know that we're going to be able to use, I'll cut them out and I'll cut my brass out, and then I'll show you how to apply that. Okay, we are back. I cut my two pieces off. Saw marks on this side, saw marks on that side. I only clean the one side up as far as sanding to smooth it out. One, it helps me remember which side I'm going to be having as my inside, and two, we'll have to shine this side up anyway and redo all that different things. So I usually aim for about a 1/4 inch thickness on the smaller knives. Both these pieces are around 3/10 of an inch, give or take, which is fine. Like I said, we'll be taking some of that off, and so for right now, what I want to do is place them on here for the drilling. I need to drill 2 holes through them and make them match these holes, which sounds easy, but it's not always the easiest thing. So what I do, we'll clean these surfaces off. Rubbing alcohol. And find our placement for where we want the bolster to be. With this shape, I don't want the bolster to be this direction. I want it to be a little bit this direction. So we'll line that up in that general area like that there. That seems to be pretty decent right there, where I want it. So I'll super glue it on first, get this other one ready. This one is not going to be on until after I drill the holes on there, and we'll come back when we're ready to do that. Okay, so we got that glued on there, got the holes drilled through it. So I'll show you the gluing part. It's not that difficult. I use super glue. Seems to be easier to break that bond later on than when I want to take it back off. But cleaning it so it stays on for the process of drilling through is very important. So again, this side here, sanded, ground flat, and then this side has the saw marks on it, so I know which is which. We're just going to clean that, clean that. We have plenty of material that we don't have to worry about our alignment this way, but we want to make sure that we're as close as possible this way so that we don't have a lot of grinding and wasted material trying to even it up afterwards on the other part of it. Now, going back to the video of how I do my handles, I prefer to drill through the knife holes into a scale and then clamp it all together, drill through the scale, the knife holes, and then through the next one. That way seems to give me my best pin alignment where I don't have any issues. I just have a kind of a cheap drill press. It's not one of those precision hand mills and stuff like that there. So if there's any angular difference in when you drill one side and then flip it over and drill the other side, or putting them both on top of each other, if you're coming in at any angle at all, that gives you a much harder time to line the pins up. For handle materials, it's not a huge big deal because you can kind of wiggle them and get them in there. But when we do the peening process on this, if it's done right, what will happen is you won't be able to see the pins in there. If the holes are wobbled out a little bit, you'll be able to see a gap in there and stuff. And then I do have a little trick that I do that helps out with that process a little bit. So one set of holes already drilled through. So at this point in time, to make things easier for me, I will mark these pieces so that I don't lose track of them. And I always go by right side, and then I put that at the top, left side, and then that's at the top. So that way, hopefully I don't get too confused later on through the process of which one's which and where they go. The less confusion you have, the better off you seem to be. Now, we got the holes drilled the whole way through, both pieces, all 3 pieces, and then the pins fit in there. These are a little loose. I do have a little bit slightly thicker pins that I do end up doing the final pinning, the peening process. But we're going to pop these off so that we can clean up the front and do a little bit of radius into the front so it's not a straight flat edge. But before we do that, I marked this side already. I want to mark where I'm going to be cutting off, where the knife is there and knife is there. So in there will be my radius. We'll radius that a little bit like that there. Probably on the belt sander just to wobble it back and forth to finish that part up. I don't have a hammer. Over there and knock it out. I do have a little vise here. We'll see if we can wiggle it out here. There you go. So now we have the two pieces off. We still have them marked, but there is glue. We'll have to clean that glue off on this side and on these sides as well. So we'll clean them up. I will radius these ends. And then, okay, so we have that done. I can give you a tip on how to make that a little bit easier. So what I do is I'll pin it. That way they're lined up with two pins, and then clamp it, hold it together, and then that way I can get them both to be very, very similar in radius. And then just go through with some hand sanding, shining them up and stuff like that there. To clean the glue off the inside of these, it's just putting them back on the belt sander, and that cleans the glue off. Again, we were at almost 50 hundredths of an inch larger than what I was aiming for, so we still have a lot of material, or some material, that we can work with to remove off there so it doesn't hurt. Just throw it back on the grinder, clean that glue off of that. So cleaning the glue off of this, a piece of brass works well, and you just scrape it off. And when we come back, I will show you how I have the pins in there. Like I said, I'll use a little bit larger pin for peening, and that way that fills that hole up a little bit better, and then I'll show you the trick that I was talking about. Okay, so we're back. And also, for those of you that are paying attention, I wrote the marks on the outside. I now moved them to the inside because I took off my extra material from the outside. So we're at that point of where we're finishing dimensions. We were around a 3 mark. Now we're down about 255, 25, 265, 27. So this one's a little bit thicker, which is no big deal. Again, in the final sanding process, we'll bring them down to where they look a little bit more symmetrical and stuff like that there. So that little trick, my brass pins that I'm going to be putting in there, and I heat them up a little bit, which causes them to be a little bit softer and allows me to fill that void that's inside there, peening them in, swelling the pin and doing that stuff. And I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but the brass will start to take a discoloration from heating up, and that seems to be where it's good. And then I just let it cool off, and then that seems to be a little bit more malleable for the peening process to create that mechanical connection onto the handle, onto the knife part. So when we come back, I'll have these trimmed up and have ready for the peening process, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so we got them in there. So one of the things that I do to make it a little bit easier, the pins that I line up with and keep everything lined up with are a little bit smaller, 1/18 give or take, and then the pins that I use for the peening, which are a little bit bigger, are around 125. Now 125 is bigger than the drill bit hole that it was in through the brass. Through the steel it's okay, but the brass kind of swells and pushes back a little bit. So I'll take that pin, put it in a chuck of my drill, and then just run this and fitting slowly just to make sure that they fit in there snug, and then hammer them through, showing out that that's enough. I can peen that, that's no problem. This one I'll have to trim down a little bit more so that when I peen it, it doesn't bend over and start to smush like that there. So I'll come back after we're peening it, and then we'll start to cut the antler and applying the antler on there. Okay, so peening's done. In my limited vocabulary of engineering and all that other stuff that has to do, like I said, I was self-taught, so a lot of words may not match up to book words or whatever, but it is fine. My idea of peening is there's two types of peening. These are peened over, which they're mushroomed out over the surface that you put them in. The other process of peening is also just driving them pins in that they actually start to swell up. So we'll clean these off, and they should have filled in them holes rather nicely that you can't even hardly see where the pin was, if you can see it at all. So from here, what I'll do is I'll clean this up, and then I'll cut the antler pieces out, and then we'll start fitting the antler to the handle. Okay, so I've rough sanded those sides off, started to do some chamfering to the edge of that, and I just do that on the edge of the grinder, the belt grinder, and just roll it on the edge and do that by hand. It's not exact perfect, but it's not horrible. Cut the antler. Changed that cut when I got over to the saw after I cut the first piece off. I changed that a little bit so I'd have a little bit less material to take away. So from here, what we're going to start doing is finding the exact spot in there where we want to take our actual blank out of, with as little as possible rolls on the edge. The less of this that you see, the better, but then again, you also want it to be wide enough to hold on to. If it's flatter it is, the better it is, but then the rounder it is, sometimes you have to sand the top to get in there to be wide enough and to fit. It's very tricky, it's very tedious as far as fitting, sanding, fitting, sanding, fitting, sanding. So first off, we have to get our angle right, because right now we're off the knife. So we'll regrind that angle on the antler to be that direction, and then we'll start fitting in there. We're really, really close. If you can see, we'll mark the bolster piece. That's where we want to be down inside of when we get to that point. And we're still a little white above and below, above the bolster piece. So we're going to sand off of this side to bring that down without hopefully bringing the ends in too far. I think we have enough material there that we'll be able to get that pretty decent and pretty close to looking good. We'll still have to sand some of this off, but still leave a lot of that on there. We'll be back on when I got that part done. Okay, so just to show that part of the process of how I get my angle and still leave it where I want it to be. I want to be at the top. I want the top to look the best, so we'll get that close as we can to the top, and then from there I will just paint pen the angle that I want to cut on that there, and then that'll give me that piece out through there the best that I can. Okay, so we're back, and no, you don't have to adjust your camera screen. Sanding antler is a very messy process, but it's well rewarding, very rewarding for it. Stinks like burning fingernails, horrible. So while I was over there, I also cleaned up the edges, cut these off. Just be careful that you don't cut into the steel, just cut it high and then sand it down and start in some of the final shapes that I'm going to have in it when it's done. So with the angles changed, they line up rather well. You want to be, we're going to round the brass off a little bit as well, so you want it to be as close on the corners as you can. You can actually go a little bit below on the corners. There'll be a little bit of white showing there where we'll sand it off to even everything up and stuff like that there. And of course up here there'll be some because of the shape of the handle. and of course on the bottom there'll be some white there as well, but we'll leave a lot of white in the handle area on the sides and stuff like that there. So from here, what I'll do is I will start the drilling process. So I want to make sure that I'm where I want to be, and then I will clamp it and drill it so that I have the holes in there to put the pins in. So from there, so for drilling, you don't have a flat surface underneath to make sure that you're flat. You'll want to pay close attention to make sure that you are as flat as you can be with the drill bit, keeping them flat, and then again on the other side when you drill through the other side. When I come back, we'll have the holes drilled, ready to mark it and cut that shape out, and then we'll be gluing up. Okay, again, and as always, I believe I got stuff on the screen, on the lens. As always, having a clean, sharp drill bit keeps you from blowing out your back sides of your antler. Keeping it clean, meaning the flutes, whenever you go down, bring it back up and let the flutes clear out themselves or clean them out as they needed. And that keeps you from blowing out the back side as you're drilling. So from here, what we'll do is we'll pin one side, and we will mark where to cut with our saw. Cutting with the saw is less grinder dust. And again, with this being an uneven surface, whenever you're grinding, whenever you're sawing, you're going to have to pay real close attention that you do not cut in this direction so that your saw would take off material you need. You want it to lay this way. You can sand that extra material off, but it's and we'll be back for the gluing part. Okay, so it's this part of the process where you actually start to see some progress of where the finished product's going to look like, and it's kind of the cool part of it. Some of them seem to take forever. Some of the processes seem to take forever, but they're all rewarned in their own little way. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to glue this up, and then as you can see, we're going to have some white down here from the inside of the antler, and the back is going to be nice because there's very little pith in there. I don't think there's any pith in there on this one. This one came out very well, and the bottom, no pith as well, so it'll shine up. It'll look really awesome. Once it's glued up and start the sanding process, we'll finish up the video of the knife and we'll show you what it looks like when it's finished. Thank you. Okay, so it didn't come out horrible. Definitely still rough grind. You can probably see that. We'll clean up the pins. From this point here, it's basically just a lot of very tedious Dremel and hand sanding work. I will post some pictures later this week of it when it's all shined up and stuff like that there. Came out pretty decent, nice shape, nice feel. And we still saved a lot of the original antler piece. So I think it came out very cool. Other news, handles will be going on these. Brandon did get them engraved today. I did get the handles on the other ones today. They're ready for rough grind, to do some rough grinding. So hopefully they'll be done later next week with final hand sanding and stuff. Till then, Raven Ridge out.